The moment I stepped through the front door, my roommate ran toward me like she had been waiting for that exact second for months. Before I could even put down my suitcase, she crashed into my arms, wrapped both hands around me, and held on so tightly that I could barely breathe. I stood frozen, stunned by the tears soaking through my shirt, because the last message she had sent me overseas had simply said, "I'm doing fine. Don't worry about me." But as she clung to me, trembling against my chest, I realized she had been lying. I had returned from overseas 2 weeks earlier than planned, hoping to surprise everyone. I had spent 6 months working on a demanding contract thousands of miles away, sleeping in unfamiliar hotels, eating meals alone, and counting down the days until I could return to the little apartment I shared with my roommate, Emily. That apartment had never been fancy. The paint was chipped near the windows, the kitchen cabinet refused to close properly, and the old couch had a permanent dent where Emily always sat. But it had become home. Emily and I weren't related, and we hadn't known each other before becoming roommates, yet somewhere between late-night conversations, shared groceries, terrible movies, and helping each other through difficult days, she had become family. So I thought coming home early would be a happy surprise. I didn't expect to find her standing in the hallway looking exhausted, with dark circles beneath her eyes and a sadness in her face that disappeared the second she saw me. Then she ran into my arms. Before we continue, if stories about kindness, second chances, unexpected friendship, and the people who quietly become family mean something to you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness for more heart-touching stories. Emily finally loosened her grip, but she didn't step away. She looked at me as if she was trying to convince herself I was real. I smiled and asked what had happened, but she immediately shook her head and told me it was nothing. She tried to laugh, yet the sound broke halfway through. I knew Emily well enough to recognize that laugh. It was the same one she used whenever she was hurting but didn't want anyone to notice. I looked around the apartment. Everything seemed almost exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. The small wooden picture frame sitting on the bookshelf was gone. It held a photograph of Emily with her younger brother, Daniel. She had always kept it beside her bed until the night she told me he had passed away unexpectedly several years earlier. She rarely talked about him, but whenever she did, her voice became softer. I asked where the photograph was, and she stared at the floor. That was when I understood that whatever had happened during those 2 weeks, it wasn't small. Emily eventually admitted she had been struggling financially. Her hours at the cafe had been reduced, her rent had fallen behind, and she had received a notice warning that she could lose her job if she couldn't resolve a dispute with her manager. But money wasn't the only problem. Her mother had become seriously ill, and Emily had been secretly traveling across town every evening to help care for her. She hadn't told me because she knew how hard I had been working overseas and didn't want to distract me. Then she confessed something that hurt even more. She had considered moving out without telling me because she was ashamed that she couldn't keep up with her share of the bills. I stared at her, remembering every message she had sent me. "I'm fine. Work is busy. Everything is normal." 3 simple lies, repeated because she thought protecting me was kinder than asking for help. I sat beside her on the old couch and told her she had misunderstood what friendship meant. Friendship wasn't pretending everything was fine so the other person could sleep peacefully. It was being honest enough to let someone stand beside you when life became too heavy. Emily began crying again, and this time I didn't try to stop her. I simply stayed there. Over the next few days, I learned just how much she had been carrying. She had been skipping meals to save money. She had been taking buses across town instead of paying for transportation. She had stopped buying medication she needed because she was trying to make sure her mother had everything first. And every night, after returning home exhausted, she had sat alone in the kitchen and convinced herself she had to handle everything without bothering anyone. I felt guilty for being away, even though I knew I couldn't have known. But guilt wasn't going to fix anything. So I started where I could. I helped organize her overdue bills, contacted the landlord with her permission, and encouraged her to speak honestly with her employer. More importantly, I went with her to visit her mother. Her mother lived in a tiny apartment filled with medicine bottles, family photographs, and the faint smell of cinnamon. She looked fragile, but when she saw me standing beside Emily, she smiled warmly. She told me Emily had mentioned me many times and always described me as the one person who makes the apartment feel like home. That sentence stayed with me. Because I had thought I was coming home to my roommate. I realized I had actually come home to someone who had been quietly making a place for me in her heart. A week later, something unexpected happened. Emily came home from work carrying an envelope. She had been offered additional hours and a permanent position after finally explaining her situation to her manager. Her landlord had agreed to a payment arrangement. And her mother's treatment plan had been adjusted in a way that gave the family a little more hope. But Emily still seemed troubled. That evening, she finally showed me the missing photograph. It had been tucked inside the envelope. She told me she had hidden it because she had been angry with herself. The photograph showed her and Daniel as children, standing beside their mother. Emily said Daniel had once promised that if life ever became difficult, he would remind her that she didn't have to be strong every second. She had spent years forgetting that promise. Then she looked at me and said something I will never forget. She told me that when she saw me walk through the door 2 weeks early, she didn't run into my arms because she wanted to surprise me or because she was afraid I would leave again. She ran because, for the first time in months, she felt safe enough to stop pretending. That broke something open inside me. We sat on the floor of that little apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills, old photographs, and half-packed boxes, and somehow it felt like the safest place in the world. Months later, things were different. Emily's mother was recovering slowly. Emily had stabilized her finances. I eventually returned to work overseas, but our friendship had changed. We no longer pretended that being strong meant suffering silently. Whenever one of us struggled, we said it. Whenever one of us needed help, we asked. And every time I came home, Emily hugged me at the door. Only now, she never let go quickly. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone who quietly carried a burden alone, please like the video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes a small act of kindness can become the reason someone finally believes they are not alone. Before I end, I want to ask you something special. Comment, you don't have to carry it alone, if you believe everyone deserves someone who stays when life gets difficult. Because sometimes, coming home isn't about returning to a place. Sometimes, it's about returning to a person who makes you feel safe enough to finally put your burdens down. And sometimes, the person waiting behind the door isn't just your roommate, your friend, or your neighbor. Sometimes, they are the family life gave you when you least expected it.